When reviewing controversial case studies revolving around graffiti, this incident in Russia stood out the most to me.
This is award-winning art, according to Russia's Ministry of Culture. The 65-metre phallus, whitewashed on a drawbridge in St. Petersburg, has won the 2010 Innovation Prize for Best Visual Artwork. Self-styled art terrorists Vina.
To elaborate on this message, the image produced by Vanya is called the Giant Galactic Space Penis, which faces the headquarters of the current Federal Security Services, which was formerly the KGB services, who eradicated democracy by defacing human rights. The group Vanya uses this method of graffiti to form more of a civil society that is non-existent in Russia today. This method, known as graffiti, dates back to ancient Italy and specifically the ruins of Pompeii that contained inscriptions and drawings on sculptures and walls depicting images that we reference today as mythological stories and tales. If we look at the modern definitions of graffiti, we can see that they are far from limited, as these two definitions have a Western perspective on graffiti, and they define it as writings, drawings, scribbles, scratches, or illicitly sprayed images on public surfaces. This type of evolution induces me to ask the question, to what extent has the evolution of graffiti impacted its intent and the way it is perceived around the world? With this question, we can first identify graffiti as a subculture as it coexists with other cultures such as hip-hop music. This integration emphasizes its evolution and how it impacts its intent and the way it is perceived. In the 1980s, a decade after the emergence of hip-hop music, the United States and Japan associated graffiti with this genre of music as it emphasized the idea of rebellion and street culture. This coexistence relates to sense perception, as music is verbal expression allowing an audience to be in touch with urban society through auditory perception, while graffiti does the same thing with images through visual perception. Following this intent, many law enforcement authorities perceive graffiti as a threat, as the U.S. Department of Justice Office of Community-Oriented Policing Services say there are 4 types of graffiti: gang, ideological graffiti, tagger, and conventional graffiti. Other law enforcement services define graffiti as placing a mark upon public or private property with the intent to damage such property, making the method seem more dangerous than it is. These statistics and measures can be also applied to Japan, as the average graffiti offenders are from the ages of 12 to 19, as they use this form of art as a language communicating their uniqueness and identity. Political and social presence contributed to this impact, as Germany during the Cold War was divided from east to west. The Berlin Wall was not only the physical barrier, but was also used as a canvas by the West Germans to comment on certain situations using images and graffiti written in German, English, and French. This also communicated the underlying need for unity in Germany. After the wall, artists like XOOOOX sprayed images of models on buildings and developed graffiti projects around Berlin, ultimately applying the way of knowing emotion to communicate the reality of models while ignoring the misconception that they are perfect human beings. He used the ugliest concrete walls while using colors of gray, black, and white to convey a depressed mood and display the loneliness and the superficial state of mind. Banksy, a famous graffiti artist, says that art should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. This inverted statement comments on the audience's reaction to forms of art, including graffiti. This brings me to the question, is the public reaction or emotion significant to the expansion of graffiti? Going back to the incident in Russia, there were 2 public reactions that make the basis of any argument. Either they're for or against the work made by Vanya.
The same symbol the ministry rewarded is now being brandished in mocking protest. This Russian youth group is angry 400,000 rubles of taxpayers' money will be given to a group it calls vandals. For Vina, The protest only legitimizes their art.
It's a very awkward situation when the state award goes to a group that in fact organizes an action aimed against the state. But this is a very important signal. Artists always express society's pain, and a healthy society accepts this.
But there's been no
The public reaction to Vanya's work is seen as purposeful, as some express emotions of disgust that not only keep the artwork a topic of conversation, but gives the group notoriety and social recognition. This is also revealed in incidents in Iran revolving around graffiti. In 2009, after the presidential elections on June 12th, there are protests emerging, inducing youth to develop a rebellious attitude as Iran's voting system is not very quote-unquote reliable. One Iranian electro music producer is talking about the graffiti artists who were making more political pieces in on Iran walls, saying these artists are at the same level as those in the West, but they're working under the most incredible pressures. By pressures, he means a strict government.
بگیرن یه وقتی یه کاری روی دیوار زدی بعدم بگیرن میگن ترویج فرهنگ هردی و لوگوهای شیطان پرستی.
انقلاب ایران هم گرافیتی داشتیم، از استانسیل امام خمینی بگیر تا پوسترها، اعلامی هایی که روی دیوار.
در صورتی که کارمون اینجوری نیست، اصلا موضوع بیشتر کارمون کودکان خیابون یا در مورد صلح و دوستی و اصلا اینطوری که اینا فکر میکنه اصلا اینطوری نیست.
Governmental attitudes towards graffiti in Iran are a result of the fears of opposition leaders like Ali Khamenei display. This emotional response tells graffiti artists that their work scares the government and motivates them to keep their message of peace and freedom in the forms of spray-painted words and images circulating. To refer back to the overall knowledge question, I mentioned that the evolution of graffiti is what impacts the perception and intent of modern-day graffiti. In order to evaluate the evolution, we must look at the origin. As I said before, Italy and other regions with ancient infrastructure hold the original pieces of graffiti. However, is this purposeful to the current intent? One may argue that from the area of indigenous knowledge systems, there's a disconnect, as a lot of the graffiti that takes place in the 20th and 21st century is more violent and territorial. I'm talking about gang graffiti. The gangs themselves can be seen as alternative communities that develop their own language that is spoken amongst their turfs. However, these languages closely relate to ancient graffiti, as they indicated locations for brothels as well as discussed political discontent. Even before the gang graffiti was popular and way after the ancient graffiti, during World War II, American soldiers drew humorous images on areas of the battlefronts. These images were also alongside terms Americans used to humiliate belligerents of the war. This ultimately hints at the isolation and escalation of graffiti culture. It does not justify its messages, but ultimately emphasizes the impact this evolution has on our current graffiti's intent and perception. To conclude this, I can say graffiti is often perceived as a method of expression and/or art. This art dates back to ancient societies, making it also have a place in indigenous knowledge systems. As the original intent was and will always be mass communication, we give credit to early societies for creating such a language. Around the world, this method is 1. Often expressed to coexist with urban music genres attacking senses. 2. Presenting social and political commentary. And 3. Developing from public and emotional reactions. Ultimately, this insists that graffiti's evolution is the reason for its intent and perception around the world.